Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here for lowpost.com, and I'm back again with the next lesson in our Scratch Dailies tutorial series. And in this lesson, again, we're all about the metadata, but this time we're heading into the fantastic Media Browser tool inside of Scratch to talk all about metadata, whether it's talking about grades and LUTs that are being applied to your footage, whether we're talking about external audio files, or whether we're getting in and creating our own custom metadata. The Media Browser is going to be a tool that's going to be at the heart of your Scratch workflow for every project that you work on. All right, and as you can see, we are in the main Scratch project selection window. We have a project already set to go called, appropriately enough, Lesson 3 Media Browser. Just to quickly check the project settings, you'll see we are set up for an HD 1080p 23976 project. I'm going to say OK. We're just going to assume that we are doing HD dailies. So with the project selected, we are simply going to enter the project. Now, as we've seen in previous lessons, if you want to import footage into Scratch, you're simply going to navigate over here and click the Import Clips button. Now, it throws people for a bit of a loop, the fact that we have the Media Browser, which is what we're talking about in this lesson, where many people think that much like in Premiere, the Media Browser is what you're going to be using to preview footage and then bring it in. That's not what the Media Browser is used for inside of Scratch. Inside of Scratch, the Media Browser is designed to look at footage that is already contained inside your project, whether it's in a timeline or not. All right? So let's come in, let's import some clips. I'm going to head to my bookmarks, to my Scratch Dailies folder. I'm just going to select the video. We're just going to select all 4 clips. And I can come down and click open if I want to, but I want to draw your attention over to the right hand side of the screen for right now, where we can get in and set things like framing, such as scaling. So for example, I'm working in a 1920 by 1080p project right now. The footage that I'm bringing in is 2K. Now, you might want to have the footage letterbox, which is perfectly fine, or what you might want to do is to get in and actually fit it to the top and bottom of the screen, or like I said, letterbox to the left and right, or the width of the screen, by simply selecting that here as you're bringing the footage in. Now, of course, this can always be done after the fact if you want to, but if you got a little bit of forward thinking, you can actually set all of that up from here. You'll also notice we can get in and adjust things like the frame rate as well as the aspect ratio. Now, there's some options over here on the left-hand side of the screen that I'm going to talk about towards the end of the lesson, so keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do with these 4 clips selected is I'm simply going to say open. I'll be told by Scratch that those clips parameters don't match the parameters of the current project that we have set up. Do we want to change our timeline to match those clips? And the answer is no, we do not. Now you'll notice that I now have those 4 clips basically tethered to my mouse. And what I'm going to do is drop them into the slots here inside of our Scratch Construct interface. Now keep in mind, if you had 50 clips, we would actually, well, we wouldn't probably see the 50 thumbnails because they'd actually stretch off of our screen. But what we're now simply going to do is just drop that into our timeline. I'm just going to remove any empty slots that we have there. And what do these clips now represent? Because to be honest, you probably think, well, they represent clips. What else are they going to represent? Well, believe it or not, they actually represent a timeline. Now, how do I know this? Well, I know this by one of 2 ways. If you take a look over on the left-hand side of the Scratch interface, you'll notice that we have an arrow pointing up beside versions and an arrow pointing to the right beside timeline. Now, what this actually is telling me is that the clips that are laid out beside each other are actually in a timeline. Now, I can also verify that by heading on over to the Edit module, and you'll now see that I have those 4 clips lined up back to back in a timeline. Now, you're probably thinking, well, Kev, how is this going to work when we actually go to export this? Don't worry. We have the ability to tell Scratch to take a timeline of what might seem to be a single clip with a bunch of edits in it, and actually break that down to the original clips that we were working with and export those as individual elements. But we'll get to that in the lesson on outputting. Let's just head back to the construct window because we also have something that says versions. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come back to the edit module, and over here on the right hand side where it says versions, I'm going to add a version. And just for kicks, let me just switch tool sets here just to the full finish tool set. I'm just going to come to the color effects window. And just for fun, let's just get in and let's just make this a little bit weird looking. And I'm going to add one more version here. We'll just select that and maybe we'll do something like this. Because what's now going to happen once we've created these versions is that if I head back to the construct window, you'll see those versions are actually added above the original version that still looks the way that it originally had when we started. So as you can see, timeline is represented by the clips sitting side by side. When we look at versions, they sit on top of the base clip. So a very visual way, a very, sort of a very good roadmap for you inside of Scratch simply by looking over at the left side of the screen. Now at any point I can simply select any of these versions, simply hit delete on the keyboard to remove them, and we're right back to where we started. But let's now get in and let's talk about the media browser. Now I'm simply going to click on the media browser button, and we're now presented with the media browser. And as you can see, it's broken down into 6 main tabs located across the top of the window. Now let's just talk about the base window for right now. Basically, in its core, what the media browser is designed to do is it's designed to let you check out all of the metadata information on clips and make changes if necessary. Now, what type of change might you need to make? Well, let's say, for example, for some reason, when this clip came into Scratch, the very first clip, that the timecode information was incorrect and it was maybe 10 frames too short. Maybe this needed to be 0515. Well, what we have the ability to do is to simply come down to timecode, and we can actually come in and punch in a different timecode value of 14360515, and when I hit enter, that new information will immediately be updated in the timecode metadata information for this clip. Okay? So this is now how you again have that, we'll call it an extra level of control over essentially every clip that you're going to be bringing into Scratch. Now I'm going to undo what I just did right there. And I want to draw your attention down to the bottom of the screen, and you'll see that we have the ability to get in and to do some basic adjustments down here, like frame rate, aspect ratio, the in and outs, as well as the timecode, and even getting in and telling Scratch that this footage is 360 degree footage, 180 degree footage, as well as whether it is stereoscopic or not. Now, to be honest, I don't know how much information you're going to be needing to get in and actually change in the main window. Where this really starts to become interesting is when you get into the windows like the grade window. Now, we're going to be talking about grades inside of Scratch in an upcoming lesson, but I do want to draw your attention right now to the source LUT and the grading LUT, because not many people realize that there could very well be 2 LUTs that are applied to every clip that you're going to be working with. Now, the source LUT, or the technical LUT, is when you're doing color space conversions. For example, converting from log color space to Rec 709, from Rec 709 to XYZ color space. Now, normally that Rec 709 to XYZ color space conversion is done at the end after you've done all of your grading. But to be honest, that's a discussion for another tutorial. The grading LUT, or a stylized LUT, is one that you would add after your footage has had the color space conversion and you're getting in and doing a grade. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, as you're adding LUTs, like a source LUT, for example, so let's just actually apply a source LUT to this first shot. And I'm going to do a Rec 709 to an XYZ color space conversion. So I'm just going to come down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to come down, and you'll see that we can load and apply a single LUT or a grade. Okay, and or you can match on shot name or search mask. What we're going to do is I'm simply going to load from the desktop, and I have a Rec 709 to XYZ color space conversion right here, LUT. I'm going to open that, and as soon as that LUT has been applied, you'll now see that that source LUT appears right here inside the source LUT window. Now, if you're watching very closely down here in the thumbnail for this clip, you'll immediately notice that color space conversion right there. Now, if I'd gotten in and added a grading LUT, for example, if I said, okay, we came to our color effects window, I came to LUT, I came to load, I went back to the desktop, I went into my 35 free LUTs, I picked one like McKinnon, I said open, there's the LUT that's been applied, I'm going to come back to Construct, I'm going to come back to the media browser. You'll now see there are the 2 LUTs that have been applied. One is a technical LUT and one is a stylized LUT. So again, this is how you're going to have extra control in figuring out exactly what is being done to each clip in your timeline. Now, one thing that I do also want to point out, you'll notice in Files you have some more information, And in audio, the one thing that I love inside of the audio tab is the fact that if you need to figure out if external audio has been added to clips, you'll always be able to see that over here. And something I should have pointed out when I first jumped into the media browser is that if any given time you need to figure out which clip exactly it is that we're talking about in your timeline, you'll actually know what slot the clip is in of the clip that you're working with, and you can then say, oh, okay, well this is in slot 3, so if I say okay, it's this clip right here. Okay? Now let's come down to metadata, because I want to talk a little bit about our FX information that we can enter here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to add some more metadata. We're going to create a new column. And the new column that we're going to create is going to be called source location. Now once I have it typed in there, I'm simply going to say add. Now you'll notice that we have source location, they're all set to go, except for the fact that the column is actually empty. There's no information that's in there. So what I could always do is simply click on that and type in, whatever needs to be typed here. And there's the metadata information that goes with the source location. Now, you can create as many custom columns as you want, but sometimes you're going to want Scratch to populate these columns for you automatically. Now, as far as source location goes, I'd actually like it to actually populate it with the source location. So let's have Scratch do that. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select all 4 of these clips. And you'll see that Scratch has identified that the current column that we're working with is the source location. Now, of course, we could pick whichever column we want to work with. And like I said, in our case, we're choosing source location. We've got all of our clips selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the FX dropdown, which lets me select a metadata reference code to insert. And what it's actually going to do is it's going to punch a hashtag in front of one of these values. And the one that we want to use is the source location. Or in our case, I probably should have called it source path, but that's okay. In our case, that's hashtag SPath. So once I have that information set in here and we have all of our clips selected, I'm simply going to say set. And as soon as I do that, you'll now see that what's happened is that Scratch has populated this metadata information with the source location. Now, if we want to take that one step further, what we could do is we could get in, and let's say this was going to be source location and the file name. What we could do is to simply come back down here, and I could come in and let's put the source name in as well, and I can say set, and you'll now see that what it's done is it's not only got the source location, but it also has the actual file name in there as well. So this is now how you're going to be able to get in and to start adding information and have Scratch populate that information for you automatically by getting in and using your FX dropdown to select the metadata information that you need Scratch to display. Now keep in mind, inside the metadata window, you also have an absolute ton of metadata information that you can add in here automatically by simply selecting one. For example, the camera model, and you'll see that as soon as I select camera model, that information is actually already tagged in the metadata of this clip, so it will be automatically displayed for me right away. Now, one thing that I do want to point out that's very important is that if I come back to the base window, you'll remember in a previous lesson I talked about probably one of the most important settings that we need to get in and set before we get rolling. And that was to update the clip reel ID with the name when we load the clip, meaning that the name of the clip is also going to be assigned as the reel ID, so that when we send dailies to Avid Media Composer, it's going to be tagged to the tape name. We'll take a look. There's the clip name, there's the reel ID, and it's automatically been populated because we had set that setting in a previous lesson. Now, one last thing that I want to show you here, strictly for workflow purposes, what we're going to do, I think I'm just going to delete all the clips in that timeline. Okay. Now I'm going to leave time. Actually, I'm just going to undo that. Let's put these clips back in there. And what I want to do is I'm just going to we'll bring in the same clips. What I'd like to do is I'm going to give you this example. So let's say you've been brought, 40 cards, 40 camera cards that all have obviously different footage, different days, all on those. You need to bring in every clip from each one of those cards, but what you need to do is every card needs to be on its own timeline. Now, to be honest, you could do this the old-fashioned way, which is to import the clips like I just showed you. You could then come over here, you could say add, you could create a new timeline, you could keep going, blah, 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 blah. But to be honest, that's a lot of work, and you don't want to have to keep doing more work than necessary because, to be honest, it's just going to bog down your overall workflow. So ideally what you want to do is you want to start having Scratch do the job for you. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to come back to the import clips window. We're going to go right back to the video folder. I'm going to select all these clips. Now, instead of coming down and saying open, what I'm going to do is take a look over here to the left-hand side of the screen. You'll remember I mentioned this earlier. What I'm going to do is, instead of getting in and selecting each one of these clips manually, now keep in mind, not a big deal for 4 clips, but if we're dealing with 40 camera cards, this can be quite a cumbersome task. Instead of that, what I'm going to do is simply tell Scratch to select a folder. In this case, it's going to be the root folder of video, which is going to contain all of our camera clips in it. What I'm also going to tell Scratch to do is to get in and to create me a new timeline. Now, with those two options selected, when I come down and say open, we're going to get a little bit of a different window that's now appeared that didn't appear before. We're going to be asked by Scratch, how do we want to bring in these clips? Now, the group that we want to bring it into is the current group that we're working on. Maybe this is going to be the name of the project that we're working on. You know, it's the XYZ movie. And inside that, we're going to have each one of the different timelines. Now, I don't want to add these clips to the current timeline. I want to create a new timeline from the name of the subfolder that these clips are coming from. So maybe that's going to be camera card 1, camera card 2, whatever. Now, you remember we did have scaling options when we were bringing the clips in before, which I'm just going to leave as no scaling. I'm going to turn off load and sync audio, calculate file size, and apply LUT. And all I'm going to do is simply say OK. Once I do that, you'll now see that a new timeline's been created, simply called video, and the 4 clips that we were working with have now been dropped into that timeline for us to now get in and work with right away. So you see how much this is going to speed up your overall workflow. Instead of having to bring in each bunch of clips manually, you can simply get in, start selecting folders, bring them in, have Scratch make you new timelines named after the folder that those clips came in. And again, an overall workflow enhancement that's going to help you get these clips in and get them out for dailies as quickly as you possibly can. All right, now as always, if you have any questions, you have any comments or ideas for upcoming lessons or courses, I want you to head on over and post them in our forums at lowpost.com/forums. And if you have any questions for me, you can always send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com.